The Smith Saga. One morning in early 90s, Coralie Smith was driving along the Princes Highway on her way to Bairnsdale, which is a country town situated 234 kilometres east of Melbourne. It was a drive she regularly took once a week, except on this occasion she was driving with her mother, Pauline Smith, who had an appointment with a Dr. Smith. On the way she would always meet up with her husband Russell, who was usually on his way home from Bairnsdale, where they would always stop and chat before continuing on their respective journeys. As expected, she spotted her husband's car coming from the opposite direction, but on this occasion she was surprised when her husband drove past her without stopping. After commenting to her mother as to why her husband had failed to stop, she looked in the rearview mirror and immediately lost control of the car, where it spun out of control and overturned. Fortunately, her husband had seen the incident and immediately attended to the accident. At this stage, he hadn't realised that his wife and mother were in the car. Working fast, he got his mother out of the car and then his wife, who were both in shock, but fortunately not injured. But what would happen next would become a comedy of coincidences after an eyewitness immediately called emergency services. First, a policeman arrived at the scene of the accident and after observing that nobody had been injured, introduced himself as Constable Trevor Smith. A short time later, an ambulance arrived and after checking that the two women were not injured, introduced himself as Ross Smith. A few minutes later, a tow truck driver from Bairnsdale arrived at the scene and introduced himself as Robbie Smith. The fact that there had been no serious injuries adds humour to the story, where the two women were on the way to see a Dr. Smith and then had an accident where they were attended to by Constable Smith, followed by an ambulance driver called Ross Smith, and then later assisted by a tow truck driver by the name of Robbie Smith. The coincidences got stranger when a couple of days later they found that the local newspaper story about the accident had been written by Ellen Smith. All people were unrelated. We know that Smith is one of the most commonest surnames in the English language, but you have to admit that this was still a series of amazing coincidences where everyone involved was called Smith. 3 flats. In 1988, Annette Kelly was looking for accommodation and answered a newspaper advertisement from someone offering to share a flat in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia. The other woman had just moved into the apartment herself. The women then met up, decided they liked one another and exchanged details. Annette moved in the following day. Within a few days they received a mail for a man they'd never heard of and so returned, not known at this address. Annette was desperately looking for work and 5 months later managed to find a waitressing position at an Indian restaurant. Unfortunately for Annette, it was on the other side of town, and so she decided to leave the flat and move closer to work, and again managed to find a flat to share. A short time later, she started receiving mail addressed to the same man that she'd returned at the previous address. She asked the other woman whether she knew this man, but she did not know him either, so Annette again sent the mail back, not known at this address. After a few months, Annette was able to get a better paid job, again on the other side of town, and so answered an advertisement in the paper and again moved in with a total stranger, as with the previous 2 women. She had only been in the flat 2 days when she went out to the letterbox and found mail addressed to the same man that she'd received at the previous 2 addresses. Annette was now starting to believe that someone was playing a practical joke on her, as the odds of receiving mail to the same man at the 3rd flat was just too much to accept. She showed the letter to a flatmate, who said that the name of the man on the letter, Shane Kelly, worked with her at the Newcastle company and had leased the flat before she had taken over from him. The following week she was introduced to Shane and they got on so well that they started going out together. After discussions with Shane, it turned out that she had moved into each flat shortly after Shane had moved out. The flats were all far apart in different parts of town. What were the odds of this happening on 3 different occasions and were probably as rare as winning the lottery? They are now married with 2 daughters, Elisa and Adrienne. It is amazing how fate brought this couple together and that they both had the same surname of Kelly. Pink Miracle. In 1967, Melbourne scriptwriter Joanne White was living and working in Hong Kong and suddenly had an incredible overpowering urge to go to England to search for her father. In 1942, her father was serving in the British Army, and when she was a little girl, her mother and father and herself were having a meal at an inn in Epping Forest in Essex, UK. In the middle of an argument, her father suddenly stood up and walked out of the inn, and she never saw him again. When she arrived in the UK, she went directly to Somerset House, which at the time held historic public records such as birth, marriage and death certificates. Joanne considered this a good starting point in the search for her father. They told that they could not trace her father without his army number, or at least electoral address, of which she had neither. Then about a week later, the first odd event happened when some Australian friends of hers, who were living in Hampstead in North London, invited her to stay with them. Shortly after moving in, she'd taken a bundle of clothes to the dry cleaners and was returning home after picking them up. When she got home, she was in the process of unpacking the bag when she came upon a pink dress amongst her clothes. Although the dress did not belong to her, she decided to try it on and was surprised to find that it was a perfect fit. Joanne considered herself an honest person, but had no intention of returning it, as she had fallen in love with it and wore it the following day when she went in search of a flat to rent. That is when the second weird event happened in her life. As she was walking along the street, a woman rushed out of a shop and grabbed her by the arm and ushered her inside. The woman told her that she was selling second-hand clothes for a charity and asked her to try on a hand-tailored pink coat that had been made in Paris. She agreed to try on the coat, and just like the pink dress, it fitted her perfectly. The woman then offered to sell it to Joanne for only 30 shillings, which she snapped up. A few days later, Joanne was feeling rather despondent after failing a job interview with the BBC in Shepherd's Bush in West London, and proceeded to walk down Acton Road. Suddenly it started to rain, so Joanne was in two minds whether to catch the tube home, but a powerful urge prompted her to keep walking. That is where the third strange event happened. In her mind's eye, she envisioned a gold ring with a pink stone. That would go perfectly with a new pink attire. The weirdest thing was that she was not particularly interested in jewellery, but she had an overpowering urge to buy one. Joanne did not know the area, but persisted in a search for a place where she could purchase the ring. She then came upon an unlikely shopfront that had wire covering the window. As she entered the store, she found herself surrounded by a dusty selection of stuffed foxes, flintlock pistols and old lanterns. As she stood there looking around the shop, her ears started ringing and she thought she would faint. As she was slowly composing herself, a man walked up to her, and feeling rather foolish, she asked the man if he had a gold ring with a pink stone in it. He replied, "Well, that's strange. A few minutes ago an Indian lady brought in a gold ring with a pink tourmaline stone." He then asked her to hold out her finger, and he placed a ring on it, and it fitted perfectly. But as he placed a ring on her finger, her ears started to ring again. He said she could have the ring for £36. As they were standing together, Joanne had a strong urge to ask the man his name, and he replied, "Stanley Gould." Her heart then momentarily stopped, and she gasped, "You're my father," and burst into tears. For some reason, her father seemed less surprised than Joanne, and calmly said to her, "I knew I would see you again one day." At the time, she miraculously came upon her father. Britain's population was 50 million, and a series of strange events enabled her to find a needle in a haystack. She felt that a supernatural force directed her into his shop.